Welcome to Encouraging Missions with Pastor and Missionary Phil Winfield. Pastor Phil has a simple passion with a clear purpose, inspiring churches, encouraging missionaries, and strengthening the body of Christ.
Welcome back to Encouraging Missions with Phil. I really am enjoying these little get-togethers for the podcast where I talk about all things missions. What I'm trying to do with these podcasts is to inspire churches, their pastors, and their people toward this global call of God to take the gospel to the ends of the earth. Also, I want to encourage missionaries themselves, those that are actually on the field in various places in the world that are serving. I want to give ideas and thoughts and talk about things that will just encourage them. Perhaps something they find on the podcast will do that. Today, I want to focus on the word missionary, and I want to start with a question. And it's this question: isn't every believer a missionary? I get asked that one quite a bit. Isn't every believer a missionary? They think like this: if we are all believers and we are all called witnesses, then why does there have to be a particular category of people that we call missionaries that, are kind of set apart by themselves? I'm going to pull over a minute and say I know the word missionary itself is kind of fallen on hard times today. Churches and some mission organizations have come up with other words that they use, but we're still talking about the same people, I think. We're talking about people who cross borders and language barriers and cultures and sometimes even oceans. They cross in order to take the gospel to other places and make disciples. Those are the people that we're talking about. Well, there's no doubt that every believer has a story to tell of their own, and everybody has the opportunity to share the gospel. Just as Jesus said, you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, and so on. That's what we're supposed to do as believers. But I want to suggest this to you, and I'm going to put it out there because I really believe this. If every believer is a missionary, then no one is truly a missionary. And that's right, to be honest. Romans chapter 10 and verse 14 and 15 is kind of a key passage, and I've used it before. It's a passage that says, how shall they hear without a preacher, and how shall they preach unless they be sent? The whole idea of there's people out there that hadn't heard, and then somebody needs to go preach to them, and in order to do that, they need to be sent to do that thing. There's a category of people that do that. I want to define the word missionary if I can. Again, I know you've got other words for it, but we're talking about the same people. So let me just use the word missionary today, and let me just define it this way. A missionary is any Christian who crosses cultural boundaries to advance the gospel and to further the building of Christ's church and Christ's kingdom. That's what a missionary is. They cross cultural boundaries in order to advance the gospel, to build Christ's church and Christ's kingdom. That's reducing it to its smallest amount, but that's what a missionary is. And there's more than one way to accomplish this. Traditionally, what happens is that a missionary is in a church, and they are busy going to church and listening to sermons, and they're doing their own devotions, and perhaps through the sermons at the church or the Bible studies they have, or perhaps interacting with missionaries, or just perhaps as they read their Bible, God begins to speak to them. They have a calling, a spiritual impression. They have an awareness of some place in the world without the gospel, or some place where missionaries are serving who are needing help, and they have this sense of urgency, this sense of need, and they just can't get it out of their mind. So usually a pastor and a church and a mission agency all get involved. There's the vetting, and there's the investigation, and there's the actual raising of money, and then there's eventually a sending. That's the traditional way that missionaries have been sent out for years and years. Currently, and this is really exciting to be honest, there is a group of people that we might have called tent makers. They have the same sense of calling, the same spiritual impressions. They are aware of a gospel lack somewhere in the world. But rather than raise money specifically to go do that, they take the skills that God has given them, or that they have honed through years of use. They take those skills, and it becomes an open door for them into other countries. I know of one family that is serving in a closed country right now as lawyers. They are business lawyers, and that's how they got access to get into the country, but their heart was about getting there so that they could share the gospel. They've been very successful at sharing the gospel in a closed country. I won't name the country. So in both cases, there's still these elements of crossing cultural boundaries, sometimes language barriers, and sometimes oceans. Simply put, let me just say it this way: a person is not a missionary without a sense of calling and obedience to that call. I was just looking at a book a few moments ago by Thomas Hale, which he's like a missionary legend. He was in Nepal for many years. He made this statement. I'm going to read it so I get it right. You don't choose to be a missionary. You are called to be a missionary. The only choice is whether you obey the call. So there's this group of people out there that have this sense of call. They already were witnesses. They already were sharing their faith. They were people who were living the life of a Christian. They had a testimony that they were upholding. They had character, but they felt that they needed to be doing this somewhere else. That's the kind of person that we're talking about today. Now, I'm going to talk about short-term missions in a future broadcast and our future podcast. And short-term missions have been around a long time, and they're very valuable. When I say short-term, I'm talking anything from 3 months to 3 years. But I want to say that short-term missions are good, but longevity and long-term missions are even better. Longevity is the key to effective cross-cultural situation. They learn the language. They have to adapt to the culture. They have to learn about the customs. They have to build relationships, and it takes time to do those kinds of things. And in many cases, they don't become effective for several, even maybe into their second term or third term, before they really become effective at what they're doing. So, hopefully every believer is living on purpose. Hopefully every believer is living on mission. That is the mission of evangelism and disciple making wherever we live. But there is a group of people that has a call to do something and to do it in a crossing a culture and sometimes a barrier or a border to do that. Now, there are a few mission myths that I want to talk about here for a few minutes. One, the first myth is this, is that missionaries are becoming extinct. They're just going away. We're not hearing about it as much anymore. Well, I am sad to report that in the United States there is a little bit of a lull at sending. We're still sending missionaries, and there are still young men and women and couples that are being called to go and do such a thing, but it's not where it was 30 years ago. It has fallen off. But missionaries being extinct, we are forgetting that in third world countries and in other countries of the world, in Europe and especially in the Pacific Rim, there are missionaries being sent out, and it's multiplying the numbers of people that they're sending out in the Christian mission to take the gospel to other places. And so missionaries aren't becoming extinct. And then here's another myth. Churches have been planted almost everywhere. When are we just going to stop doing this? Well, there are lots of churches being planted around the world, lots of churches being planted right around my house where I live here up in Iowa. But listen, I want to tell you that there are vast areas of the world that have never seen a Christian. They've never read a Bible. They don't even have a gospel tract. The country that I am most familiar with, where I served for many years in Peru, has had many, many missionaries, but I know many places in Peru that they've never seen a person that wasn't a Peruvian. They've never had a Bible. They've never had someone come and talk to them about Jesus. They may have only heard of Jesus in passing, but they don't know who he is. And so this is just not true. There are places all over the world that still need the gospel and need churches. Here's a couple of things that go together. Third world churches don't want Western missionaries and don't need Western missionaries. Well, there comes a place and a time in the life of an individual church when the church is growing, has grown up, has a pastor who has got a handle on what he's doing, or he has some help. The systems are working, the church is growing, they may be planting other churches, or perhaps these outsiders can step away and these people can take it all on their own, and they do. And I know certain places in my own country where I served in Peru that this is going on. But I want to tell you that the call that I get the most when I visit other countries is can't you send us somebody to help us? We need training for preachers, training for how to have church, training for Christian educators, training for disciple makers. We need people to come and help teach us these things. We need theology. We need seminaries. We need to go deeper in the Word of God. So the third world church, the second world church, the first world church, we need to be sending people who can help do these kinds of things. Here's another one I think is a huge miss. myth, and that is this: the responsibility for evangelism, disciple making, and church planting belongs to the national church in each country. It's no business of anyone else. Well, eventually, once churches are established, that is true. If there's a number of churches started in a certain country and there's enough to multiply, that's true. But what do we do about countries around the world where there's no Christian or there's no church at all? There's no Christian, much less a church. Somebody's got to go. Those people are sitting in darkness and they need somebody to come and tell them the good news. Here's one that I love to talk about, and that is this. It's another myth. That is that missionaries are just misfits. They just don't fit here in the United States. They might have been in the ministry, but they didn't do well in the ministry, and they're more fit to be in another place. And after all, maybe it doesn't take quite as much to be a missionary. Well, au contraire. I want to tell you that to live in another culture, to learn another language, to work among people that you really don't understand, to try to help your family adapt to a new location and a new set of customs is very difficult. Plus, there's just the whole idea of loneliness. It takes somebody that's in tune with the Lord and is spiritual and loves the Lord and carries on a personal devotional life with God and has control of himself and his family. Boy, I'll tell you, they're not misfits. You say, well, I've just known some missionaries that it didn't seem like they were really qualified. Now, you're talking about another subject. Being qualified is one thing, but I could be honest and say that there are many pastors that are in pulpits in our country that aren't qualified to be there and shouldn't be there. There are many missionaries, perhaps, that around the world that are there, and they may have gone for the wrong reason. Maybe they shouldn't be there. Maybe they're not qualified to be there. They're not really doing much. But that doesn't mean we just cancel the whole endeavor. No, go into all the world and preach the gospel is still there. We've got to do it. And so missionaries are not misfits. They are very, very needed. And then here's another one. The other side of the coin is, well, missionaries are just super spiritual people. They're just a cut above everybody else, and they're just so super spiritual. Nobody can attain to that. Well, that's just not true. They should be spiritual people, and they should be following the Lord. They should be listening to the call of God. But they're not people that are flawless. They're not people that are just perfect. I'm one of them, and I'm telling you, I'm not perfect. Neither was I perfect as a pastor or perfect as a missionary, but I was surrendered. And that's who the missionaries are. They're not perfect people. They're people who have been selected and called by God. They are a category of people that God has given a specific call to. Now, I'd like to go on and on about this, and no doubt it'll come up many times in the future. But for today, I just want to leave you with one little quick story. When Bonnie and I first went to Peru and were learning the language, we were struggling with it, and we came across a family that had escaped from Russia. When Russia first opened up the doors, started letting people leave the country after the Soviet Union collapsed, this couple left Russia, and they looked around the world to find a place that would receive them, and Peru was receiving people, and they let them come, and they were trying to learn the language. We were trying to learn the language. We didn't have it down, and they didn't have it down, but we met them. We began to get to know each other and started to fellowship together. We began to invite them to our house thinking, well, at least we can practice Spanish together. Interestingly enough, the first people that Bonnie and I had the privilege of leading to Christ in Peru were not Peruvians. They were Russians. God has his way of sending you to reach the people that need to be reached. I was so glad that we went there. So glad that we did what God wanted us to do. We weren't super spiritual or a cut above everybody else. We were just people that were available, and we did surrender to the Lord. And I want to tell you that we need people doing that today. I'll close with this. Let me say it again. If everybody is a missionary, if every believer is a missionary, then no one is a missionary. No, there's a call to go into all the world and preach the gospel. And if somebody is not answering this call, churches or pastors, and they're not vetting people like this, supporting and sending people like this, what happens is we keep overfeeding the same people with the bread of life here at home, and we keep giving it to them. Folks, the need for the gospel is equal all over the world. The gospel is needed everywhere. But the problem is the difference of availability. In the United States, we have an abundance of availability of the gospel. Even in my neighborhood, many churches have been started. I say many, like 8 churches have been started within blocks of my house. in the last little while. But there are places in the world on this planet that have never even had a gospel tract. They have never even had a Gospel of John. They've never heard the gospel preached to them or explained to them in any way. Go into all the world and preach the gospel. Going to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, to the uttermost parts of the earth is still in the Bible. And so, missionaries are real, and they are people called of God for a particular purpose. God bless you. Thanks so much for being with me today and for listening with Encouraging Phil. We'll come back with another one next time. Just a little heads up. Next time we're going to talk to somebody from the nation of Hungary that is starting a church, and we're going to have an interview with them and let you hear about the elements of church planning in a foreign place. Well, God bless and have a great day.
Thank you for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast to hear the next edition of Encouraging Missions with Pastor and Missionary Phil Winfield.